oh my God, like why is everyone so competitive? Why is everything so intense?
In the UK, it's very easy if you do have a mental health issue, anxiety or something, you can get help with your deadlines and assignments. That wasn't really actively marketed in Singapore. I was talking to a few people who said they actually found it quite like hostile. And Singaporean student was giving their speech and the exchange student at the end said with a straight face, what are you talking English there?
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Youth Tea Party, the show where we spill the tea on all things youth. We are not a political party and have no interest in running for office. Hello Akshay, how are you doing?
Hi, John. I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to be here and yeah, looking forward to this.
Akshay is from the UK. He's one of many hundred exchange students who go on exchange every year. When they come over, it's a different experience. Some say they're here to just have fun, not to study. Some come here and work very hard, actually. Some come here and embrace the different culture. What's something that is very obscure or very weird about the UK that most people wouldn't know?
Yeah, so I mentioned, we've talked about the nature in the UK, a lot of lakes, rivers everywhere, and there you see a lot of swans, beautiful creatures, very nice. And I'd say an obscure fact is every single swan in the UK is owned, well, formerly by the Queen, but now the King. And if, you, I don't know, say hurt a swan or killed a swan, you'd be committing treason. And I think there have been a few weird and wacky cases where people have to spend a few nights in jail and things like that for messing with a swan, which sounds really quite, unique and weird. So don't get into a fight with a swan if you can.
Tell us a little bit about the process of applying for an exchange program. And for yourself, you came to Singapore for one whole year. So for most Singaporeans, when they go overseas, they usually go for one semester, which is 4 months, or maybe they extend it to half a year. But you've come here for one whole year. Tell us a little bit about the process. Was it competitive? How does the university judge who gets to go and whatnot?
I'd say firstly in the UK, doing an exchange is a lot less common and even desirable than in Singapore and in a lot of other countries. I talk to a lot of Singaporeans, and the main thing on their mind as soon as they join in their first year is they want to go on exchange. That's a very kind of hot ticket item. Whereas I'd say in the UK, it's not as big a deal. I'd say not a lot of people do it. It's quite a minority of people who do it. And like I said, there's definitely not that buzz around it like there is in Singapore and that excitement. And again, another difference is like in Singapore and a lot of the rest of the world, the norm is to do a semester abroad, like you said, 4 months, 6 months. But in the UK, and again, not like anywhere else in the world, the norm is to do a year. And so that really wasn't a decision that was in my hand and a lot of other British students. It's a year and that's the only option. And so that was kind of the process. And then in terms of then moving into next steps of which university you want to attend, we in Bristol anyway, the choice was you kind of put down a list of 5 different universities, and based on kind of the quality of your application, the grades you got in first year, kind of all depends where you end up.
Why NUS?
Very much didn't want to stay Eurocentric or really within the Western world. I had a lot of choices to American universities, Australian universities. But again, I feel that experience is very similar to the UK. And if you go to certain other parts of the world, it's very different and you have a whole fresh outlook on life kind of thing compared to, as I mentioned, Australia, UK, very similar sort of settings at times. So in those 5 choices I made, they were all within Asia Pacific. They were, Singapore. I put a few options in Japan, Hong Kong, but Singapore was my number one option. I think firstly, I thought it'd be an easy transition, which it was in terms of being English speaking. And, you notice it when you're there. I really like kind of wanting to experience that very much East meets West type vibe, which you do get in Singapore. Of course, you've got the high-rise buildings, the gorgeous city centre, and then you go a bit more out, and you're in local hawker centres where everyone's speaking Chinese.
Yeah.
So I think that clash was really cool, and I think that's what drew me to Singapore. And I think the main motivating factor was really living somewhere else, kind of building a life.
Yeah. So you've come to Singapore, first time in Singapore.
Once I landed at Changi and I got the grab to the hotel I was staying. Luckily, I was with my parents, which made the first few days a lot easier. But on that taxi route, and I remember us passing through the city centre at night, and you see the huge amount of buildings. see the big UOE2 towers, the big Bank of China. And I remember staring out the windows. It was late at night with all the lights on and just thinking, oh my God, what have I done? Like you just suddenly feel like a fish out of water. First day of NUS was in terms of classes was quite subdued. You know, of course, the classic, you know, having to ask people where your lectures are, where your classes are. But I'd say just my first overall experience of NUS was really quite wow. You know, I think the campus really is very impressive. You mentioned earlier about Singapore and that not quite authentic sense of green, but I think in NUS, you've got the big U-Town green, you've got all the you've got the chickens running around near U-Town and all things new. So I think it's just kind of both overwhelming, but taking that in at the same time. But
Yeah, and coming to NUS, which is obviously a very competitive environment, I would say, even as a Singaporean, right? How was it like? Like, was the transition tough for you at all? Because when I speak to some exchange students and they're like, oh my God, like why is everyone so competitive? Why is everything so intense? Was it like that for you? Did you feel like you fit in really well, or was it very hard to acclimatize to the competition or the intense nature of learning here?
yeah, I mean, there definitely is. You do notice it, and I think people a lot of the time are talking. The conversation is about the next assignment, the grades, where it isn't quite like that in the UK. Although I'd say a big thing in terms of the intensity was just how university is done in Singapore. So my experience in Bristol is, of course, we have 2 semesters as well, but our modules run throughout both semesters. So
Oh,
we don't have a turnover in Sem 2 where you pick new modules. It's the same throughout the whole academic year. And so, of course, it's the same. You do about 4 or 5 modules, but within each module, you have about 2 big assignments.
mm,
So usually about one big assignment in Sem 1 and one big assignment in Sem 2, and whatever they may be, similar to Singapore, a 2,500 word essay, something like that. But that constant workload of, I think there's always an assignment coming, even though a lot of them are quite little, often 15% making a video, say, which isn't as strenuous, but I feel that it always is a date in the calendar and it's always within the next few days, the next week where an assignment is coming. Whereas I think in the UK, you're often working on a big assignment for 3, 4 weeks at a time, but it's not constantly thick and fast. Did
I'm very interested in stories, right? Surely you have memorable moments when you were here in NUS or Singapore. You just share some random stories with us, like stories that, maybe made your time here or maybe broke your time here, right? Things, just any information you want to spill.
this story kind of is attributed to kind of just the difference between Singaporeans and exchange students and different cultures. So I did one of my modules in public speaking
Mhm.
and really good course. And I think that just yeah, I think public speaking is always going to be something good for you. You're always going to need it in life. I know you very much follow that mantra and so I when I saw that course, my eyes lit up and I definitely wanted to take it. And so we had one speech where it, you had to give a speech on kind of an occasion. So let's say that's a best man speech or a speech at a funeral, let's say.
Mm.
And so it was actually quite interesting. I did a fake speech at my brother's best man speech. I think the other British girl, she did I think a speech for her grandparents. And I think all the Singaporeans, they did a valedictorian speech. So again, I think that yeah, that really is, I think, again shows the culture in Singapore and the mindset. But they literally all 5 Singaporeans shares a valedictorian speech.
Were there any other gripes that you had living in Singapore?
Um, in terms of Singaporean people, I felt they were lovely people, and especially one on one, I felt you could connect and have a good conversation. And I'm not sure if this is Singaporean people or potentially just a foreigner experience around the world, but I felt when I tried to often interact with a group of, say, NUS students or Singaporean students, I struggled to integrate quite a bit, and I think that was quite a common experience for a lot of exchanges, and I think you saw that in terms of most exchangers are friends with exchanges. And I know that is quite a common experience around the world, but I would say I did struggle at times to integrate with, say, and have a group of Singaporean friends as a friendship group rather than just individuals dotted about. And I guess that is a culture experience, in terms of Singlish
Yeah.
and things like that. And culture experience they all had growing up in JC and whatever, and they can talk about that, which of course you're always going to be an outsider. But
Mm.
I was talking to a few people who said they actually found it quite like hostile in terms of they kind of in a group of Singaporeans they were kind of given the cold shoulder. I'd say that was at times, struggling with that when in terms you want to come back and say I've made this lovely Singaporean group of friends, whereas that didn't quite happen at times for me anyway.
Do you think it was the Singlish, or do you think it was just the cultural difference? Was it language at all, right? Because we all know that Singlish is a language in and of itself. And even though Singlish masquerades as English sometimes, it's very, very different. And so those who are more sensitive to Singlish, Singlish is really a whole new language, right? So do you think it was the language itself, the way it was spoken, or do you think it was really like what you mentioned, culture and the things and the topics that Singaporean students are interested in general?
Yeah, I mean the Singlish definitely kind of is something that you kind of need to adapt to and get used to. I remember in that same public speaking class,
Yeah.
we had a different exchange student join the class one day, and a Singaporean student was giving their speech, and the exchange student at the end we were all giving criticism, and he said with a straight face, "What were you talking English there?" Because he generally he couldn't understand that. Yeah, I remember I was burst out laughing. I was like, no way you just asked this guy if he wasn't speaking English.
Yeah.
But I'd say, of course, that's part of it. I'm not sure. I played a lot of basketball when I was
Mm.
in Singapore, NUS Basketball Club. I really enjoyed it. I love playing there and very nice people. Like I mentioned, one on one, I felt I could, have a good conversation with the guys. But I felt when we were in a group, I don't know. I feel you were a bit left out, and some of the jokes just go over your head.
So, for example, for you as a Londoner, if you are with friends, like from Liverpool or Newcastle or Edinburgh, for example, right? Some really thick accents as well, and some really not just thick accents, but the slang is very different as well. Would you personally find it hard to integrate or struggle at all, or do you think no?
No, it's a very good point actually. And just going back 2 minutes, I think I've taught my parents a few Singlish words. My brother, they love can and cannot now. Honestly, they love it. They use that very frequently now. But yeah, it's actually a very good point and something I've not thought about that much. But I definitely think, yeah, very different culture if you go to Newcastle, Liverpool, some areas of Scotland,
Yeah.
compared to London and the South. I think there's very much, as I'm sure you know, that north-south divide in the
Yeah.
UK. My girlfriend, she's actually from Middlesbrough, it's about 45 minutes south of Newcastle. So we met in Bristol. Obviously, she's coming from the north to the south, and you can see kind of her accent's been eroded the
Mm.
last 2 years. And then when she goes back up to Middlesbrough and I go there, I sometimes, when she's talking to her friends, I honestly like they're talking too quickly and I can't really understand.
What I noticed about Singaporeans, and something that I personally am trying to get Singaporean youth to not do as well, is people always say when you speak to a foreigner, you code switch, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that term. I'm sure you understand. But for many Singaporeans, code switching seems to entail putting on another accent. And very often they put on the accent in a really bad way, like, right? So it's some like washed up American accent, like you don't know where the hell it came from. A few
Mm.
people put on a British accent. I've had students put on a British accent before. It's quite funny. I was trying very hard not to laugh. And I always tell them, I was like, why do you have to speak with a different accent, right? Can't you just speak normally and like speak slowly, enunciate your words, but just speak like a
Yeah.
Singaporean?
I think, like you said, enunciation, I think, is probably the main thing. I've not actually experienced that, but I think that would be quite hilarious, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You've probably experienced it a little bit, but maybe you never really caught on, right? Maybe you just feel like that's the way Singaporeans speak, right?
yeah,
But you'd be surprised to find out that the way they speak to their friends would be very different from the way they speak to you. I think you're someone that understands the bigger picture, right? And I think you've been really mature in coming over, getting the best of your education, right? So you had this public speaking course. It was interesting. Let's talk a little bit about geography, right? So you major in geography, and yes, you've only done perhaps your first year in Bristol, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about how you found NUS geography, its courses. How was it for you?
Oh, and US geography was I really enjoyed it, and I think one thing about NUS geography and NUS as a whole is you definitely learn a different perspective on the world that you don't in the UK and Bristol. You know, you realize as soon as you go out of the UK or any Western country, kind of your whole teaching and everything you've learned is sort of very anglicized, very Eurocentric.
Mm.
You come to NUS and you do certain geography courses, and you're like, wow, you're learning case studies about Thailand and, you know, and all these other Asian countries, and you're learning about their history and what they're doing in their cities and communities. And you realize, wow, there's a lot going on here that you don't really learn about genuinely at all.
Speaking of different styles of teaching, so what's different? I'm just curious.
You know, I mean, me and you have spoken about this before, but kind of very much more student teacher interaction as compared with the UK. There's very much, I think, on the whole, the UK classes are often a bit bigger, especially in the young years.
Mm.
And I think there's often quite a barrier between a lecturer and a student. You often don't feel comfortable to go to your lecturers to ask questions. No one will speak in the lecture. Um, the lecturer sometimes will often put out there, oh, and they'll ask a question and nobody wants to answer. Um, Whereas I think in Singapore, of course, you're always going to have that in a student environment. Often people will just be on their laptops or whatever, and not really paying attention. But I think the lecturers in Singapore, they try to be a bit more open. They try and learn people's name a bit more. Or that was my experience anyway in all my courses, and people were more engaging. I think a big part of that was in a lot of my courses, 10% participation and attendance grades. I think that makes such a difference, and I don't know why the UK doesn't do it because that just, for me, not being funny, but I thought they were easy marks a lot of the times.
Yeah.
I was happy to put my hand up but actually, me and my exchange friends spoke about this a few times. Often we felt, Singaporeans still weren't putting their hand up, even though kind of those marks were on offer, which I was, sometimes a bit confused about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you
Exactly.
noticed that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why I love working with exchange students, right? Because the culture to speak up is there. And I think for Singaporeans in general, we're just really worried about saying the wrong thing, optics, and how people perceive us. So this is something that, of course, I try very hard to ensure that our students get over as well, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to learn, you want to collaborate and produce knowledge, you have to speak up. If you don't speak up, then the atmosphere is going to be very flat. And I think when the atmosphere is very flat, people just are just not that into the cause at all. So I think, yeah, I mean, kudos to all of you for coming in and brightening the brightening the space. But I think in general, given the right incentive and guidance, and I don't just mean participation marks, right? I mean incentives as in if the lecturer builds the community in the right way, you'll find that people do speak up, and people do have many very interesting and smart things to say as well, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's I knew an expat family in Singapore, kind of a very loose link. So I saw them a few times, and the husband of that family, he works in a bank, and we were chatting, and he was saying, of course, we know Singaporean students very hardworking, very intelligent, come out with the best grades, but in a lot of the big banks and big companies in Singapore, you see the top positions are often filled
Yeah.
with expats.
Yeah.
And the kind of is the question has to be why, and is that because are Singaporean students not speaking up enough? Obviously, in that corporate world, you need to show off sometimes the work you've done, put your ideas out there. Also, one theory he put out there was the education system doesn't make you creative enough sometimes in Singapore, which again, to be innovative and often to be promoted, you need to kind of show that. I'm actually quite interested on your thoughts about that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that in recent years it's been improving. And I would
Mhm.
say that of course we have many creative Singaporeans as well. But I think in general, yeah, the general model is more compliance, right? So it's about creating someone that works really well, produces good results, but like you said, may not necessarily be inclined to think out of the box, to be more aggressive or to be more risky with their actions and practices and aspirations even, right? So I think in general, this is something for me that I want to encourage more as well. I want to encourage Singaporean students to be a bit more expressive. I think that's really important. It all starts with expressing yourself, right? And thinking about your relationship with the world, your relationship with other people. And I think, for what it's worth, a lot of our exchange students come in and they like the way in that sense whereby they're not afraid to express themselves, right? Of course, expressing yourself in the right way, expressing yourself in a contextually relevant way is important. But I always believe that the best way to learn to do that is to just express yourself in the first instance. And then we fail forwards and we learn from there, right? I mean, nobody is born a great public speaker, or nobody is born someone who knows his or her pathway from day one, right? We figure it out, we fail a lot of times. And yeah, I think that's something that you are very right in saying. Singaporeans do very, very well, but we also need to think about how we can articulate our value better. I think that's the important part, right? How do you articulate your value?
Now, I was just to be fair, I think that's in like kind of every culture that people are always scared to kind of, that if you say the wrong thing, people are going to be judging you. And then I think, I think everyone's still getting over it. I'm still getting over it. But I think it's just, yeah, you just kind of got to get there and realize no one actually really cares that much in the grand scheme of things.
So one of the things that I'm really excited and very intrigued to hear your opinion on as well, right, is that in Singapore, geography is a major that is not extremely popular. Right, we all do geography in secondary schools, and we all do geography, not all of us, but most of us do geography in junior college as well, right? So naturally, some people have passion for geography and they take it up as a major in university, but it's not that popular numbers wise, and people always have qualms about geography's value as a career and everything. I'm just thinking, what's the UK context like, right? Like, what do youth or university students think about geography as a major, as a career? I think the situation is a lot healthier in the UK. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think there's always going to be, if you, study STEM subjects, they're known to be a bit harder, and those students might have a bit of a
Yeah.
superiority complex, we'll say. But no, I think on the whole, yeah, there's not any qualms about studying, say, arts and social sciences subjects, and those courses have very high enrollment. But
Mm.
and so I wouldn't say there's that issue as much. You talk to a lot of Singaporeans, and you think every second person you talk to is studying engineering or computer science. I was like, wow, very different when you go to Bristol. There's a whole range of and subjects that people are studying, and yeah, I'd say arts and social sciences are very popular. And would you say for kind of arts and social sciences degrees and subjects generally, do you feel some Singaporeans may feel pressured to take other subjects, even if their preferred subject would be arts and social sciences?
I would say yes, but I would also say that, especially in recent years, our government has pivoted a lot and placed a lot of focus on making the arts and social sciences a viable field of study and a viable career. And if you look at the statistics, right, I was just looking at statistics earlier today, just for fun, you realize that in Singapore, the highest percentage of majors in any given year is usually business and administration, right? So that's the first one. Second would be engineering, and then the third would be arts and social sciences. So
Mm.
we're not that far behind actually, and I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are doing arts and social sciences increasingly now. So I think that's a good sign. I think we're now starting to see that many jobs out there require an arts and social science expertise. It's a very open degree. Just because you read geography doesn't mean you have to be a geography teacher, right? You could be anything you want to be, actually. So I think once people start to understand that and people start to see more evidence of people going into different vast careers, then I think they start to believe that geography is something that is viable. Throughout this podcast, you've already gestured to some differences between Singapore and the UK. But just wondering, right, like, what are youth in the UK generally worried about?
Cost of living crisis, I think,
Yeah,
in the UK has become crazy, especially if you're living in London.
yeah,
It's really not really quite feasible to live in London outside of living with your family and trying to get your own house. And I think there's quite a big because if all the jobs are in London, but you can't afford to live there, and
yeah.
so there's that big, and then people end up living kind of outskirts of London and long commute and things like that. But yeah, or from my time there, you could definitely see that was that was the same case, and people grappling with increased cost of living and wages and things like that.
What are you anxious about anything? Is there something that so-called keeps you up at night?
Sure. I mean, yeah, for sure. I think the big thing for me coming up to graduation now, I think is is jobs, is where you're going to live. Like I said, my job will most likely be in London, but you can't really afford
Yeah,
to move out. And I
yeah,
think that is a big thing that people grapple with in the UK, and it's just really not feasible.
yeah.
Of course, as in Singapore, there a mental health crisis like there is
Mm.
across the world. I can't say I struggle with that personally, but of course I know people who do. And yeah, of course, I think the culture is a bit different in the UK and Singapore, where I'm not sure. I never felt kind of in the UK. It's very easy if you do have a mental health issue, anxiety or something. You can get help with your deadlines and assignments like that. I wouldn't say I really that wasn't really actively marketed
Mm.
in Singapore anywhere, whereas in the UK they do very much actively market. And do you think that contributes to kind of issues in Singapore?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, like you said, right, first of all, everywhere in the world, people suffer from mental health issues. I think in the UK especially, it's a lot more open. And it's getting a lot better now in Singapore. The conversation has started. People are talking a lot more with people who need help, right? And conversations between friends and people who don't necessarily know anything about mental health have begun. I think there's a lot more cross conversations now. In the context of the university, I do think that in general, the faculty and the university is quite understanding, but
Yeah.
there needs to be a conversation, right? So it's not something like you said, it's not something that's explicitly marketed, right?
No,
So
yeah.
there are initiatives from time to time, and you if you really have problems and you speak to any professor, I'm very sure
Yeah.
most of them would be more than happy to say, sure, take a break first, don't rush it.
Of course, I don't want to make a mockery of the issue, but I think it not quite gone the other way in the UK. But a lot of people will just say I've got
Yeah,
issues just
yeah,
to get an extension,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
obviously isn't right as well. So yeah, it's kind of it's a fine balance.
Hearing from you, I think we as Singaporeans need to be very thankful as well because for you, for example, right, you looking for a job and in London, and then you have to move out, and your partner is not from London, and then you have to figure out where you're going to live. And most of the time, you're going to move out somewhere. For a lot of us, we live with our parents till we're quite old, and I think that's a blessing, right? We save a lot on rent. I'm sure I mean, London rent is insane, right? So I think as a youth in the UK, saving up money is really quite tough, right? So I think we could all learn a thing or two and count our blessings a little bit because I think a lot of you elsewhere in the world are struggling as well, especially those who have to move cross country, just to get a stable job and a stable home actually.
Is there kind of a motivation for Singaporean students to move abroad, or do a lot of people stay in Singapore?
I would say most of us stay in Singapore. I would say most of us stay in our parents' home just because it's just not viable to move out elsewhere. I
Yeah.
mean, you pay what 2,500 nowadays rent in Singapore is crazy as well. So I mean, you rent a small apartment, say for you and your partner, for example, you pay like what $4,000 a month, and that's like what even if you're earning really really well, that's like more than half your salary. So what's the point, right? So I think for a lot of
Definitely.
us, when I was at that age, I was just living with my parents anyway, and Singapore's so small, right? So there's no way you're gonna have to commute like mad anyway. So I think this is something that I hope we can see as well, and we can only see all these things when we start to speak to more youth that don't live in Singapore, right? To hear from their experiences. So yeah, I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk to you today. I want to end on a brighter note, right? So
Uh,
yeah, I guess for you in the UK, what do you do for fun? I know you say a lot about drinking and nightlife, but do you do any other things for fun? Like what else do you do for fun?
Yeah, I feel I've given the UK a bad rep that we just like to go out and get drunk and go clubbing and be a bit of hooligans. I'd say I enjoy the sports culture in the UK. a lot more than Singapore, I have to say, in terms of high quality sport in the UK that really isn't feasible in Singapore. So going to watch kind of county level cricket matches, going to watch, even championship level, so the
Mm.
tier below the Premier League
Yeah. Hmm.
football matches,
Yeah.
very accessible to get tickets for them and still very high quality football. And you've got that kind of camaraderie in the stands where people are very passionate, they're
Yeah.
chanting. Of course, people are also drinking there, but that's separate to that. But in terms of the passion in the football stadiums, I think that is something we very much do for fun and I really enjoyed and just kind of I don't know, I didn't get the sense in Singapore that kind of going to the park and having a kickabout with your mates was just kind of a very, I don't know, common experience at all. When I was growing up, every day after school,
Yeah.
someone would go to someone's house, get the football and we'd all just
Yeah.
kind of get muddy in the parks. I think the sports culture
Yeah.
in the UK is something I very much do for fun and yeah, I guess something that Singapore might be lacking a bit.
Always welcome back anytime. I hope you had a good time in Singapore. Thank you so much for chatting with us. I'm sure a lot of our a lot of your Singaporean counterparts can learn a lot from you. So yeah, please spread the word in the UK, spread the word in Bristol. For everyone watching, please like, share, and subscribe as we continue to grow. Thanks.